Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day, there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And we're going to have a great discussion today because we're going to be talking about something that a lot of people talk about. Nobody really says how to do it, but they say, ooh, you should do this. So let's find out what the heck we're talking about. So please join me in welcoming Michael R. Drew to the program today. Welcome, Michael. How are you?
I'm great, Deb. Thanks so much for having me here.
Great. Well, let me tell people just a little bit about you, and then we'll jump into this. So today's guest is a legendary figure in the world of publishing, influence building, and media strategy. Michael R. Drew is the founder of Promote a Book and the co-author of the best-selling book, Pendulum: How Past Generations Shape Our Present and Predict Our Future. He's the behind-the-scenes force who's helped over 130 authors hit the bestseller lists, including those lists in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and more. From political leaders and media moguls to entrepreneurs and thought leaders, Michael has guided some of the most influential voices of our time in crafting movements around their message. Known for turning ideas into cultural phenomena, Michael doesn't just market books. He builds legacies. Today, we're diving into the strategies, insights, and philosophy that have made him one of the most trusted names in platform building. Again, please welcome Michael R. Drew.
Again, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I love it. Well, I looked at your bio on LinkedIn, and I've got, it was very interesting. And so I always love asking my guests, how did you get to where you are today?
It's a good question. We call that the Genesis story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm a high school dropout,
Okay.
and I decided that when I was 17, I wanted to go spend some time with a young lady up in a different state, and
Hmm.
did some sold some illicit substances and other
Mm-hmm.
things, and decided after doing that I didn't need to stay there.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a bad home life or anything else, so
Mm-hmm.
I went back home and became the manager of a Burger King,
Okay.
and then I met a young lady, and we got married.
Sure.
I was 18,
Mm-hmm.
and she said I was too smart to manage a Burger King. And
Mm-hmm.
so she said, you got to go find a better job. And
Mm-hmm.
so I found a job working at a company called Executive Excellence, which at the
Ooh.
time was a division of the Covey
Mm-hmm.
Leadership Center. And this is
Mm-hmm.
before Franklin and Covey had merged to become Franklin and Covey.
Okay.
Right. So you had Franklin Day Planners and the Covey Leadership Centers, two
Mm-hmm.
separate
Mm-hmm.
organizations back then. And so the Company Leadership Center had this magazine called Executive Excellence, and
Mm-hmm.
I went in and started selling the magazine. And within 3 months, I'd become the number three salesperson. Now that's only significant because the one, two, and then four and five salesperson had been there for 5+ years and were just
Right.
renewing
Little
old
more
subscriptions.
experienced. Mm-hmm.
Well, they were experienced, but they also weren't bringing in new business. They were
Right.
renewing old business. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was
Mm-hmm.
bringing in a bunch of new revenue. And at that point, that's actually when the merger between Franklin and Covey occurred.
Okay.
And when that happened, Ken Shelton, the executive editor of the magazine, was gifted the magazine by Stephen R. Covey as
Mm-hmm.
payment for ghostwriting Seven Habits of Highly Effective People.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, Ken came to me and said, hey, Mike, we publish all these great authors in our
Mm-hmm.
magazines. Why don't we start publishing their books?
Hmm.
And as a young, naive 18-year-old, I'm like, sure,
Sure.
let's do that. Why not? And so I didn't know anything about it when I
Mm-hmm.
started. And so I had to go and figure out how the entire industry worked. I had
Mm-hmm.
to figure out retail distribution. I had to figure out how to um, uh, secure authors and get
Okay.
PR and do all the stuff
Mm-hmm.
that goes into public,
Mm-hmm.
find printers and all of that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And so I would say that I failed fairly miserably that first year, but I learned a lot and I
Right.
worked really hard.
Which that's the
And I
important thing. Hmm.
Well, and actually, the most important part of those actions was that I was seen by a fairly important person in the industry,
Mm.
who recommended me to a publisher in Austin, Texas,
Okay.
by the name of Ray Bard at Bard Press. Now, Ray
Hmm.
Bard in the world of business books
Hmm.
is a legend. He's done some of the biggest business books
Hmm.
outside of New York of all time. And he had just come off of a huge success with his book, Nuts, Southwest Airlines Crazy Recipe for Success. And he's like, we just made this book a bestseller. I want to be able to make more books bestsellers. So Ray Bard hired me. And the first day on the job, he said, Michael, we publish business authors. What our authors want more than
Hmm.
anything else in the world is to be a New York Times bestselling author.
Right.
What I want you to do is go figure out how the New York Times bestseller list
Hmm.
works. So what did I do? I literally called John Wright, who was the guy at the New York Times at the time
Hmm.
who compiled the list, and said, "How does your list work?" And he laughed and said, "I'm not going to tell you, but let's stay friends." I called Jackie Blaze at USA Today, and
Hmm.
Bob Hughes at Wall Street Journal,
Hmm.
and some of the other lists that existed back then. And they also did the same thing. They laughed and they
Right. They're
said,
not going to give away
"Well,
the secret sauce.
it was
Hmm.
a secret sauce, but keep calling back in.
Hmm.
Appreciate that." And so I did. And I
Hmm.
developed a relationship with them. And I started
Hmm.
slowly gathering little
Hmm.
bits of data and information here
Hmm.
and there from them.
Hmm.
And the first book that I worked on for Ray Bard was a book titled "Secret Formulas of the Wizard of Ads" by Roy H. Williams.
Hmm.
Roy is known as the Wizard of Ads.
Hmm.
He owns the fourth largest ad agency in North America for buying radio. He's a
Hmm.
living legend in marketing and
Hmm.
advertising.
Hmm.
Um, and so Roy had attempted to run a big campaign on his previous book, The Wizard of Ads, the first
Hmm.
book of what became a trilogy,
Hmm.
and wasn't able to make the bestseller list.
Hmm.
So in our case, we put together a strategy where what we did is we mailed an advanced copy of the book to the general manager of every radio station in the country. Now,
Ooh.
we did this knowing that they all knew who Roy was because they were
Right.
always trying to vie for
Hmm.
his
Hmm.
clients' money. So
Right.
they knew who Roy was.
Hmm.
We gave them an offer and we said, look, if you buy 20 copies of this book at full retail price from this retailer on this day,
Hmm.
and if you run 200 radio ads during the month of launch promoting the book, we're going to give you this is so long ago that we were offering them a 12 tape training library on VHS.
Ooh.
And it was with Roy teaching the sales reps
Hmm.
how to use the book
Right.
to help them sell
Hmm.
radio advertising because the book
Hmm.
advocated, argued strenuously, with lots of
Hmm.
details and support, that the best form of advertising for a small or medium-sized retail
Hmm.
business was radio. And so they all knew that and they all wanted the relationship with Royd. So we mailed that out to about 4,000 stations and had
Hmm.
867 stations participate. We launched the book to number three on the New York Times and number one on the Wall Street Journal bestsellers list. And that was
Hmm.
my first of now 131 consecutive New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA
Wow.
Today,
Hmm.
Success,
Hmm.
Business Week bestseller uh, authors. And so
Hmm.
that's how I started
Hmm.
was working for Ray Bard.
Hmm.
Um, Later, when I left from being a publisher, which
Hmm.
is I was a publisher for just over 5 years,
Hmm.
um, I realized that publishing had some real severe limitations in terms of what eh, jobs you could have if
Hmm.
you didn't own
Hmm.
your own publishing company.
Right.
So I started my own marketing agency. Ray had sold Bard Press at the time, and
Hmm.
um, I had at that point when I left working as a publisher, I had 19 New York Times bestselling books under my belt.
Hmm.
And so the first year out on my own, I promoted seven books to the New York Times bestsellers
Hmm.
list. Well, I could tell you that three of those clients weren't happy with me. Not because I didn't deliver exactly what I said I would deliver, which was the
Hmm.
bestseller status,
Hmm.
but because what I didn't realize as a publisher, um, that I hadn't yet realized as a business a
Hmm.
marketing consultant and business owner was that as a publisher, the author's expectation had to do with retail distribution. It had to
Right.
deal with making sure that we had PR, that we had
Hmm.
sales going through the right
Hmm.
retailers, and all of the logistical
Hmm.
stuff. Now,
Hmm.
the logistical stuff is 100% necessary to make the
Hmm.
list, to
Right.
make the New York Times, right? It's
Hmm.
it's it's there,
Hmm.
but that's the only expectations they had. So I never had to deal with anything
Hmm.
outside of that. When I started my own agency, what I discovered was that I wasn't being hired to make them New York Times bestsellers. I was being hired to grow their business.
Ah,
Uh, right. And so what I had to
very
do,
different. Mm-hmm,
very different.
mm-hmm,
Now,
mm-hmm,
the tactics that we were using, or at least
mm-hmm,
start off with, was the book promotions and bestseller campaigns,
mm-hmm,
but that's just a tactic towards the
mm-hmm,
outcome. One of the things that most people fail to understand when it comes to promoting a book, same thing with building a business,
mm-hmm,
is that you always start out by defining the outcome.
mm-hmm.
And then
Right.
you define the measurement metric for
Mm-hmm,
the outcome. Then you define the strategy.
mm-hmm,
And then you define the tactic.
mm-hmm,
What most small business owners do, because they don't know any better, and what
mm-hmm,
most direct response marketers and small agencies do, is they focus at the tactical level. Oh,
mm-hmm.
you need to have a podcast, or you need to
Right.
be on Facebook,
Right.
or you need to be on Google.
Mm-hmm,
Those are all tactical
mm-hmm.
things.
Right.
And in absence of strategy,
Mm-hmm,
they're not going to work very well. And
mm-hmm.
if the strategy doesn't have a clear outcome
Right.
with a clear
What's your
measurement
goal?
metric,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
And a way to measure that we've
mm-hmm.
done that, you're not going to be able to accomplish it. So,
Right.
what this first year on my own taught me was that I needed to become a student of platforms. Now, for
Mm.
your audience, let me define what platform means, because
Okay.
we hear the term platform a lot, and it
Mm-hmm,
refers to technology, and it
mm-hmm,
refers to events, and it
mm-hmm,
refers
mm-hmm,
to all sorts of things. The the legacy definition of the term deals with something that elevates you above the crowd. So
mm-hmm,
if you think back, historically, missionaries would sit on soapbox, or politicians would sit
mm-hmm.
on
Right.
soapboxes,
Right.
so
A
that they
true
would be
soapbox. Mm-hmm,
yeah,
mm-hmm,
literally a soapbox, so
mm-hmm,
that they would be standing above the crowd, so
mm-hmm,
that their voice could be heard
mm-hmm.
over the crowd. Because if you
Right.
speak into the crowd,
Right.
it's going to get
It goes
muted by
like
the
two
people,
rows and that's
right?
it. Mm-hmm,
So the soapbox was a
mm-hmm,
platform that elevated them
mm-hmm,
above the crowd.
mm-hmm,
Same thing happens in a theater.
mm-hmm.
You're on a stage because you're
Right.
elevated above the crowd, so that
Mm-hmm,
your voice
mm-hmm,
can go out and
mm-hmm,
not be impugned by the people
mm-hmm.
in front of you.
Right.
So that's what a platform is.
Mm-hmm,
Now, technology has created new opportunities
mm-hmm,
for platforms. So certainly, being online allows you to borrow other platforms like
mm-hmm.
Facebook and
Right.
X and
Mm-hmm,
LinkedIn
mm-hmm,
and all of those things, and also to build your own, like
mm-hmm,
podcasting,
mm-hmm,
or your own website,
mm-hmm,
and to build your own
mm-hmm,
platforms. And so what I had to do is become a student of understanding platforms, so that
mm-hmm,
when we executed the New York Times campaign strategy,
mm-hmm,
that I knew that all the tactics not only meant the
mm-hmm,
bestseller outcome,
mm-hmm.
and the strategic outcome, but it also meant the business objective,
Right.
not just the book objective.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas as a publisher, it was all book objective.
Right.
Here it
We
became
want to sell X number of books.
well,
Mm-hmm,
at the publisher, but
mm-hmm,
as a business, it's
mm-hmm.
about increasing lead flow, or
Right.
increasing speaking
Mm-hmm,
fees, or getting more
mm-hmm.
speaking gigs,
Right.
or selling more
Mm-hmm,
products, or like there's other
mm-hmm,
defined measurements of
mm-hmm,
success that have nothing to do with the book, but are
mm-hmm,
the outcrop
mm-hmm,
of the successful
mm-hmm,
promotion of the book.
mm-hmm. Right. And I love that because, as you said, people go into this without knowing what they want. When we talk with other guests about not having, say, a marketing plan or a business plan, I say it's like getting in and telling your GPS, take me wherever, right? Your GPS goes, oh, this is going to be fun. But yeah, you need to be able to say, here is where I want to go. And it needs to be measurable and achievable. I'm a marketing person. I was taught to have BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals,
Ideas,
right?
goals. Yep.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that's great. But, and I'm not saying not to have them, but sometimes those are so big, hairy, and audacious that you cannot achieve them because you're thinking, oh, I want to, do $5 million in sales. Well, that might just not be achievable. But even if it is, you got to have a whole bunch of other stuff in the way, or not in the way, in place, to get
Well,
you there.
that's where that measurement comes in.
Mm-hmm,
One of
right.
the things that you might appreciate that I get a lot is, oh, I want to change the world. Well, good for you. I'm
Yeah,
so
but
glad you want
how
to
do
change.
we measure that?
How do we know that we've done that?
Mm-hmm,
I don't know. So no. At the end of the day,
mm-hmm,
it's about having
mm-hmm,
achievable. It only happens
mm-hmm.
through measurement, right?
Right.
So
Mm-hmm,
setting the objective and having the
mm-hmm,
measurement makes that thing
mm-hmm,
achievable.
mm-hmm,
An example for your audience that I would share, I worked with John Maxwell on some projects, and
Hmm.
I worked with him on a book titled Intentional Living. John Maxwell, of course, is the most respected expert on leadership
Hmm.
in business in the market today.
Hmm.
And he's got over 125 books that he's
Hmm.
published, a couple dozen that hit number one on the New York
Hmm.
Times bestseller
Hmm.
list. And so when I worked with him on intentional living, I asked him the same thing I ask all of my clients, which
Hmm.
is, how are we defining and measuring success?
Hmm.
Because everything
Hmm.
else from a campaign standpoint is
Hmm.
dictated by that answer.
Right.
And what he said is, I want to get 1 million people to tell a story of living a life of significance. Okay.
Okay.
So we have something. We have a number, a
Hmm.
million. We
Hmm.
have an action, a
Right. Tell the
story.
story. Hmm.
So then the question is, how do we measure the
Right.
story is being told? Because
Hmm.
you and I can sit here all day and tell stories that,
Right.
unless it's on a
Hmm.
podcast, aren't
Hmm.
recorded and aren't known.
Hmm.
So how are we going to measure
Hmm.
that? And so what we did is we came up with a relationship building sequence
Hmm.
for his audience,
Hmm.
whereby we did what kind of leader are you
Hmm.
assessment tied in with Myers-Briggs, and
Hmm.
then we said based on that. We would like to help. Based on your Myers-Briggs syndrome type, we'd like to help you um, be a better leader and
Hmm.
to be able to tell stories of significance.
Hmm.
And so we had 4 result types
Hmm.
on the assessment, and we gave each of them a free 7-day experiment with John, and they were
Oh. Hmm.
different.
Hmm.
One
Hmm.
each designed for the psychographic of that result
Hmm.
type,
Hmm.
uh, thereby ensuring that we were giving them actions and outcomes that was
Hmm.
tied to what motivated
Hmm.
them in the language of what
Hmm.
motivated them.
Right.
And we gave them 7-day experiment with John, because we're like, look, spend 5 minutes with John a day,
Hmm.
do the action he tells you to take.
Hmm.
And at the end, you'll
Right.
be a better person.
Hmm.
You'll feel better about these things.
Hmm.
And so and what we asked them to do with their daily actions could be like buying coffee for the person behind you at Starbucks or
Hmm.
whatever. We asked them to come back to the site and share their story
Hmm.
of that action and
Because
how
then
they
we can
felt.
count it.
Because then when you count it, it's measurable.
Hmm.
Also, it's more impactful for the individual, because
Right.
when you write it
Hmm.
out,
Hmm.
it releases the you've already had the
Hmm.
oxytocin
Hmm.
release with the event, and
Hmm.
then the dopamine that's tied to the
Right.
success of that event
Hmm.
is now released and then
Right.
cemented within your
Hmm.
memory.
Right.
And so
And
it
there's
helps you to
accountability.
connect them.
I have to
And
go
there's,
do that. Hmm.
yeah, but so we're getting that result for the individual, for the
Hmm.
customer. So that at the end of that, we said, cool, you should turn this into a ritual and a habit. You should make this a
Right.
lifelong habit. Do a 30-day journey with John,
Hmm.
doing basically the same stuff for
Hmm.
30 days. We're going to include a copy of the book,
Hmm.
Intentional Living.
Hmm.
And every day we're going to give you a different action,
Hmm.
and you're going to come back and tell us the story
Hmm.
about that. And we did that. And it took
Hmm.
it like 3 years, and we got 1 million people to go through that whole
Hmm.
program and
Hmm.
to tell stories, right?
Hmm.
So we were able to take the broader
Hmm.
outcome of 1 million people and
Hmm.
telling stories. Create.
Hmm.
We said, how do we measure that? The
Hmm.
measurement metric that
Hmm.
dictated what the campaign
Hmm.
became. So all of the PR, all of the
Hmm.
advertising, all the work that we did drove into the quiz,
Hmm.
which drove into the free training, which drove
Hmm.
into the paid
Right.
training, right?
Hmm.
Because that was how he was measuring success. It wasn't
Hmm.
by being a New York Times bestseller
Hmm.
again. It wasn't
Right.
based on the number of books he sold.
Hmm.
It was based on the number of stories
Hmm.
told that were
Right.
measured.
Right. And it wasn't just a one and done thing, where you said, here it is. It was, an ongoing thing. And
Yeah.
and I think that's what so many people think is, I'm doing X, whatever, and then I never have to do it again. No. If you,
Right.
especially if you're an author, I mean, it's not just, hey, I've published this book. you know you need to continue promoting it. You need to, all of these various things to keep people thinking about it, because we have the attention span of a gnat. And if you don't remind me that something is there, I don't remember, because I've gone on to 3 or 4 other things.
Well, and this is also why we build into our programs things that release hormones like
Hmm.
oxytocin,
Hmm.
serotonin, and
Right.
dopamine, because those are the things that take an experience and
Hmm.
cement them.
Hmm.
Right? When you're doing something in public, that releases oxytocin.
Hmm.
When you're achieving something, you're
Hmm.
releasing dopamine, and
Hmm.
these are things that we just tactically things that we
Hmm.
want I want my clients to get their clients to experience
Mhm.
so that they deepen relationship. Because at
Mhm.
the end of the day, my clients, they don't sell transactional based
Mhm.
products. They're not selling commodities. They're
Right.
not
Mhm.
selling
Mhm.
earphones
Mhm.
or whatever, right? They're
Mhm.
they're selling ideas.
Mhm.
And their ideas are meant to change the hearts or the minds or
Right.
the bodies or the souls
Mhm.
of their audience.
Mhm.
And that type of um, esoteric
Mhm.
engagement requires building relationships
Mhm.
so that you can have trust and so that you
Mhm.
can get them to follow the advice you're giving.
Mhm.
Because if I'm going to change your body, as an example, you've got to
Mhm.
trust that I actually understand you
Right.
well enough that
Mhm.
that you could trust my
Mhm.
advice. Because
Mhm.
if you've got diabetes or if you've
Mhm.
got cancer, or if you've
Mhm.
got a problem with one of your lymph nodes or
Mhm.
whatever, like these things
Mhm.
all impact our
Mhm.
lives. If you don't trust that I know what I'm
Mhm.
talking about specific to you,
Mhm.
you're not going to engage with me
Right.
at a deep level.
Mhm.
And that's true of changing a heart,
Mhm.
a body, a mind,
Mhm.
or a soul. And
Mhm.
so what we look at then is what is the rule set
Mhm.
for building relationship
Mhm.
with people? How
Mhm.
do we build a relationship?
Mhm.
And good marketing should do in non-intimate environments what we do to build relationships
Mhm.
in intimate
Right.
environments,
Mhm.
right? Marketing and selling is simply the transference of confidence from one
Mhm.
person to another,
Right.
right? Selling is done in an intimate environment.
Mhm.
Marketing and advertising is always done in a non-intimate
Mhm.
environment.
Mhm.
But let me ask you this: if you're online, does your
Mhm.
physiology change? Does your psychology change? Do you change as a person because you're online versus in the real world?
No, not really.
No, you're the
Mhm.
same, Deb.
Mhm.
In all cases, you have the
Mhm.
same needs, right?
Mhm.
So so you online, you want to be treated the same
Mhm.
way in that non-intimate environment that
Mhm.
you are treated in an intimate
Right.
environment.
Mhm.
So what we look at then is how do we emulate in a non-intimate environment what
Mhm.
we do in an intimate environment, and
Mhm.
that requires a huge amount of respect for your audience and
Mhm.
your customers.
Mhm.
And it requires understanding them at a very deep and intimate
Mhm.
level because what you have to do, there are things that we subconsciously do
Mhm.
in intimate environments
Mhm.
that we have to do consciously in non-intimate
Mhm.
environments.
Right.
Uh, So what we look at then is what is the modeling to be able
Mhm.
to do that?
Mhm. Right. And it's about that whole know like trust thing, right? We're not giving you money, time, thoughts, whatever it is, if we don't trust you. Now you might to a little bit of a degree, right? But the more important the outcome is maybe the way to put it, the more there has to be no like trust.
Right.
And yeah, like I might, do $5 at McDonald's because I don't really care. But if I'm going to go to one of the big steak houses and plunk down several $100s, then I need to know. I must be right after lunch, right? Um, I need to know that what I'm getting is that high quality type of food, service, everything.
Yeah, it really is about Bro Williams would actually say you need to speak to the meat at the heart of the dog, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the
Mm-hmm.
Pavlovian sense, we're all dogs. We have that meat that we hanker for. But
Mm-hmm.
trust for non-transactional things is the currency that
Mm-hmm.
is exchanged and
Mm-hmm.
that is needed. And there's a rule set to
Mm-hmm.
creating trust with somebody, right?
Right.
And what most marketers do, and I refer to most direct response marketers, but most
Mm-hmm.
marketers generally is douchebag marketers.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I do is that they basically apply the same rules that a pickup artist uses to go get laid,
Mm-hmm. Right.
right? A pickup artist is taught psychological tactics
Mm-hmm.
to be able
Yes,
to when they
flatter
speak to
somebody. Yeah, all those various
yeah
things, right?
the psychological
Mm-hmm.
tactics um, to be able to move the trust
Mm-hmm.
line, and their objective is to talk to what they teach in pickup artistry is they want the men to talk to 100 women in a
Mm-hmm.
night. If they talk to 100 women using these tactics, they'll
Mm-hmm.
find three that they'll have sex
Mm-hmm.
with,
Right.
right? Right. What is a good direct response conversion rate?
Well, probably about 3%.
3%, right?
Three
Right.
per
There's a
100.
reason. There's a reason for that because the tactics that are being used are ostensibly the same.
Right.
They're trying to get into their customers' pants just to pull
Right.
off their wallets, right?
Right.
That's it's the reality of what's going on. Um, and I don't know about you, but I don't know many people who turned a one night stand into a long term relationship. It
Not too
happens,
many.
but
Right.
it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen
hmm
very often.
hmm
Well, why would that be any different in building intimacy and
Right.
trust with
Right.
your
hmm
audience,
Yeah.
right? They want to be
hmm
respected at the same
hmm
level that you do,
hmm
and they're people. They're not part of the problem with direct response is what's the number of clicks, what's the number
hmm
of opens, what's the
Right.
number of click throughs,
hmm
conversions,
hmm
leads. It dehumanizes the person on the other end. A
hmm
click is a person.
Right. hmm
That's a person.
Right.
Why did they take that action?
hmm Right.
Why did they
What
take that
made
action?
them click?
What made them click?
hmm
That's a person.
hmm
Let's treat them like a person.
hmm
Let's determine why they would click
hmm
and make sure that we're giving to them what they expect
hmm
on the other side.
hmm Right. And then we all have to recognize that that trust is very fragile and can be broken very quickly. And I think that's one of the things, a lot of people is maybe rest on their laurels, or like we said, they just go so far and then they don't do anymore. You have to continue that. I mean, back to the analogy of dating, right? It isn't just a one night stand. Now, yeah, when we were younger, we did those stupid things, right?
It
But
could
but
be,
right,
but
but if we wanted something longer term, then there had to be reasons for it. But if say, the gentleman in question did one little thing where I don't trust him anymore, and it might be something as little as waving to somebody or looking at a text message from a former girlfriend, right? Poof, it's
yeah,
gone.
for sure. What's interesting is they say don't judge a book by its cover, but we always do.
Right.
And and first impressions
Mhm.
are almost always impossible to overcome. So if somebody has a
Right.
bad first impression with
hmm
you,
hmm
that's going to be a really
hmm
bad experience
hmm
and or a bad relationship, and it's probably not fixable.
Right. Well, and a lot of times you don't even go any further. You're like, nope, nope. And some of it is just purely superficial. I don't like his shoes. Oh my God, I can't believe he wore that shirt. Or it can be something much more. But it's and I think that's the challenge in all of this is trying to figure all of that out.
Well, see, and to me, it's not a challenge. It's a translation.
Right.
Because you know what? We all do this in the real world all the
hmm
time, all day, every day, and we don't
hmm
even think about it. We don't
hmm
think twice about it. We get up and we shower. Why do we shower? Well, yeah, we
hmm
don't want to smell for ourselves, but we
hmm
also don't want to stink it up for other people.
Right. Yeah.
We choose the clothing that we wear
hmm
because we want to feel good,
hmm
but we also want to convey something with the clothes that
Right.
we put
hmm
on.
hmm
We hold ourselves a certain way. We
hmm
speak a certain
hmm
way. We associate with
hmm
sports teams or universities or political
hmm
parties or
hmm
bands or musicians because these are all virtue cues.
hmm
We're virtue
Right.
signaling the
hmm
things that are important to us.
hmm
So we do that in the real world. So let's compare that to um, uh, the non-intimate and marketing.
hmm
So the work that I like, and I would urge your audience to go research this, is by a gentleman by the name of Desmond Morris.
hmm
Desmond Morris actually had a PBS show until like 1979.
hmm
He was a zoologist and a clinical researcher, and it's his
hmm
model that I use in marketing.
hmm
A zoologist and a researcher.
hmm
So what happened was back in the late 50s, early 60s, there was this biological question about the Homo sapien primate
hmm
as to whether it was a pair bonded or promiscuous species of primate.
Okay.
And what's interesting about primates is that you can definitively define how promiscuous or pair bonded the species that species is based on one really interesting fact, which is the size of the male genitalia to the percentage of the body size of that species.
Hmm.
So based on that, you could tell how promiscuous or how pair bonded the
Hmm.
species was. Yeah, the bonobos they'll screw anything interspecies even
Hmm.
to the gorillas and chimps that might have
Hmm.
one or two mates for life.
Hmm.
Um, well, Homo sapien primates happen to fit smack in
Pretty
between all of
close.
them.
Yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
We're right in between all of them.
Hmm.
So are we a
Hmm.
promiscuous or a pair bonded species of
Hmm.
primate? So Desmond Morris did the work in the field,
Hmm.
right? He did the research, and what he determined was that Homo sapiens have a unique need that makes their decisions slightly different than others. They always desire promiscuity, but they choose pair bondedness because of the emotional security that it
Hmm.
brings.
Right.
And so we desire we that promiscuity is always there, but we
Hmm.
we, we prefer secure emotional
Hmm.
security, so we go with pair bondedness. So he based on that, he then asked the next most rational question, which is,
Hmm.
okay, so pair bonded relationships that are long-term relationships, how does a long-term relationship last over a shorter one?
Hmm.
And what he found was that at the foundational level of all relationships, that there are these 12 steps of intimacy that must be followed, and
Hmm.
that if the two parties skip more than one step, so
Hmm.
any two steps,
Hmm.
1 and 3, 4 and 5, 6 and
Hmm.
9, doesn't
Whatever.
matter,
Hmm.
pick the two
Hmm.
in any number, that the probability of that relationship being a long-term relationship was the same as having a one-night stand.
Hmm.
And the reason for that, the analogy he gave was like laying tile. If you start
Hmm.
off at this side of the room and you're a
Hmm.
quarter inch off, it doesn't look
Hmm.
that it's not that big
Right.
of a deal.
But
But by the time you get over to the other
yeah,
side of the
you've
room,
got six
you're
inches between your
you got
tile.
right. So what
Hmm.
feels like nothing at
Hmm.
first becomes
Hmm. Right.
the the thing that
Hmm.
tears the
Hmm.
relationship apart, which is why
Hmm.
they don't have long-term relationships if they
Hmm.
skip more than one step,
Hmm.
two or more steps.
Right.
Um, and in fact, there's a whole vein of modern marriage counseling today that is based on this concept of 12 steps of intimacy and relaying the
Hmm.
tile to be able
Hmm.
to fix the
Right. Hmm.
relationship, right?
Hmm.
And so the question that I would then ask is, what is the difference between building a pair bonding relationship with a
Hmm.
partner and building a relationship with a customer?
Hmm.
Right. There are some
Hmm.
functional differences because of
Hmm.
the
Right.
type of
But
relationship that they are, but
it is still very similar.
it's
Hmm.
still the same
Hmm.
thing. It's the 12 steps. It's the
Hmm.
same
Right.
modeling of 12
Hmm.
steps of intimacy. And so what Desmond Morris said in pair bondedness is that step one is eye to body. I'm out at an event.
Hmm.
I'm out at a club. I'm at
Hmm.
a restaurant. I'm
Hmm.
at the movie theater,
Hmm.
wherever I'm at. I'm at church. And I see a beautiful woman.
Hmm.
I see the beautiful
Hmm.
woman. Um, what does that beautiful woman control over me?
I don't know. She,
Nothing.
nothing. Yeah, I was going to say
Nothing.
she can't control
And how
anything
does
at that point.
how
Hmm.
does she control how I view her?
Same way
Well,
because mhm,
a little bit more,
mhm.
right? Who is she with? What is she wearing?
Right.
How is
Hmm.
she holding herself?
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
Okay, now let's apply that to business.
Hmm.
A business marketing advertising is being seen in an environment that you don't own and you
Hmm.
don't control,
Hmm.
right? So you are now the beautiful woman
Hmm.
that's being seen. What you're doing by putting
Right.
yourself out there in
Hmm.
advertising, you're putting yourself out there
Hmm.
to be seen,
Hmm.
right? So the virtue signals that you put out
Hmm.
convey to your potential audience
Hmm.
whether or not there's alignment of
Hmm.
value and
Right.
perspective,
Right.
right? And so marketing advertising is
Hmm.
exactly the same. It's being
Hmm.
seen in an
Hmm.
environment that you don't control and noting who's going to be there so
Hmm.
that you can present yourself
Right.
in a capacity
Right.
that is going to be
Hmm.
attractive versus repellent
Hmm.
to your desired audience,
Right. Which is
right?
exactly why you have to know who your desired audience is.
How was that?
I love the people who, hey Michael, who are your perfect clients? Everybody. No. It's never ever everybody. And I know that's scary for folks because they're thinking, but everybody's got all the money, all of those various things. But why waste your time marketing, dating, whatever it is, to someone that's not going to be a good fit? I don't want to say long term because you
Well,
might not be looking for long term,
it,
but yeah, why
it's a
waste your time?
you want alignment of values and
Mhm.
perspectives,
Right.
right? That's really what it
Hmm.
boils down to. The
Hmm.
length is a different
Hmm.
question.
Right.
Um, in business, usually our ability to serve somebody is somewhat more limited,
Hmm.
right? And so, um, yeah, that's
Hmm.
kind of the question. But yes, the
Hmm.
objective is understand your
Hmm.
audience so that you can
Hmm.
speak in their language
Hmm.
about what's important to them
Right.
and create that bridge
Hmm.
over to you. That's where
Hmm.
that relationship
Hmm.
starts.
Right. And you just said something very key. It's what's important to them, not what I think is important to them,
Right.
because you may or may not get that right. But why not just find out from them what's important to them rather than guessing?
Right. Yeah,
And
that's so for me, what we do with our clients, we have
mhm,
this four steps model, but
mhm,
we I have clients, Brian Jeffrey Eisenberg. They're
mhm,
the fathers of the persona architecture movement. There's a
mhm,
system out there called
mhm,
avatars, which is a bastardization of personas.
mhm,
But personas is the idea of trying to understand your customer at such a
mhm.
deep level that you create. We're borrowing from Hollywood,
Right.
where you create fictional characters
Mhm,
that are representative of
mhm,
different segments,
mhm.
not just demographically. Demographics are
Right.
insufficient,
Right.
and not
Demographics
just
are such a small part.
it tells you about,
Mhm,
but not the motivation of.
mhm,
So demographics is one part.
mhm,
Psychographics is another important
mhm,
part, but so is understanding the journey of how that person got to
mhm,
that point. So
mhm,
Aaron Sorkin, as an example, he's the writer
mhm.
of West Wing and a bunch of other
Right.
TV series. He when he does a series, he will map out. He'll create all of the characters in the show
Mhm,
first, and
mhm.
then what he'll do is he'll create a complete life history on
Right.
every single one of those
Mhm,
characters,
mhm,
so that when he gets to writing the script,
mhm,
what he's looking at, you've got in fiction, you've got story
mhm,
arc and character arc. Story
mhm.
arc is what you see in an action
Right.
flick.
Mhm,
So if that
mhm,
happens, you got to solve it.
mhm,
It's done.
mhm,
Character arc is about the response of the character
right.
based on
Right.
external things that are
Right.
going on.
Mhm,
And so really good writing. This shows that when Academy Awards and Emmys and all of those things,
mhm,
they focus on character arc, not
mhm.
story arc.
Right.
And so, but borrowing from that, what he does is he'll take, cool, we've got in this episode, we've got these 10 characters.
Mhm,
We know what their backstories are. We know strengths, weaknesses,
mhm,
all the things about them. And we're going to put them into the situation
mhm,
based on their background. How are they each going to, by themselves,
mhm,
respond? And then together, how is
mhm,
one response going to impact the other person, trigger them,
mhm.
or whatever else?
Right.
And then you see
Mhm,
the interplay of
mhm,
these interactions
mhm,
between the characters. So persona architecture is meant to do the same thing. The idea
mhm,
is to be able to map out the entire
mhm.
backstory of the character,
Right.
right? And so the character um, has family and parents and
Mhm,
school and all those things,
mhm,
and things happen to get them to the point where they
mhm.
need you for
Right.
whatever it is you're offering. They
Mhm,
need you for
mhm,
whatever reason. So now that we know that, when we map out their customer journey
mhm,
against those 12 steps of
mhm,
intimacy, we know the types of things that we believe that they're going to be
mhm,
positively or negatively
mhm,
responsive to. And this is where, at that point, once you've done that level of analysis and work and planning,
mhm,
where then the concept of optimization is
mhm,
acceptable because at that point you're optimizing against assumptions that you made
mhm,
about how you thought
mhm,
your customer was going to respond to something.
mhm,
And if they responded positively
mhm,
or negatively against that
mhm,
action, you're like, okay, our assumption there was wrong
mhm,
based on who that buyer persona is.
mhm,
Because we're wrong
mhm,
here, how do we change, adjust
mhm,
that thing
mhm.
for that persona? Because it's not
Right.
about all customers, it's about
Mhm,
that persona going
mhm,
through that journey
mhm,
and that action. And so the persona architecture
mhm,
is a model that
mhm,
I would strongly advocate
mhm.
for your audience
Right.
to look into
Right.
by Brian Jeffrey Eisenberg.
Oh yeah. And so I'm thinking about this from, the author's perspective. And it's got to start at the very, very beginning, right? They can't, they have to know who they are writing the book for before they ever write a word, right?
Yep.
You know,
They need
and
well. First of all, what they need to do is define what their outcome is and their
right.
measurement.
Yeah.
Then they
Yeah.
need to know who the
Mm-hmm.
customer is
Mm-hmm.
and what their
Mm-hmm.
outcome and measurement is,
Mm-hmm.
and then you put it together.
Right. Right. And I think that's where people stumble is, and whether it's a book, a product, a service, or whatever, it's I think this is a great idea. Everybody will buy it. Well, okay, but no. you know, and it doesn't matter what it is. Are they, maybe they, you think, hey, this is the next greatest marketing tactic, and they're like, but I like what I already do. Or maybe your greatest thought has already been done by somebody else. I mean, all these things. And so it can't just be, here's what I think. I mean,
Yeah,
even
it's
the huge authors are thinking, who is our reader? Who's going to buy the book?
so most of us are not Emily Dickinson,
Right.
right? Emily wrote for herself.
Mm-hmm.
She had an
Mm-hmm.
audience of one,
Right.
and that
And
was
she didn't
great.
care if anybody read
And
it or not. Yeah.
she didn't care,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the reason why you're in business is because
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to make some kind of
Mm-hmm.
difference. The reason why you would
Right.
be writing a book is
Mm-hmm.
because you're trying to make a difference and
Mm-hmm.
an impact on people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
So that has to be acknowledged and
Mm-hmm.
known up front. And
Mm-hmm.
your story
Mm-hmm.
is only as valuable so far as it allows the
Mm-hmm.
reader to um to see your concepts humanized,
Mm-hmm.
they can sympathize or empathize
Mm-hmm.
with those kinds of
Mm-hmm.
experiences.
Right.
Right, it's really always about the reader.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To the reader, it's always about the reader.
Right.
If you don't have an existing relationship with
Mm-hmm.
the audience, the reader doesn't. They
Mm-hmm.
don't care about you. They care about
Mm-hmm.
them.
Right.
And your book or your product, your service is
Mm-hmm.
about solving a problem that they
Mm-hmm.
have.
Right. And even the biggest nonfiction writers know that, right? James Patterson, whoever it is, if they all of a sudden do something different, their long-term loyal readers are going to go, what the heck? And now, of course, the issue is the fact that they're going to go onto social media and they're going to say, don't buy that book. It has nothing to do with what X author normally does. Now it might have been a really great idea, but that's the hard thing sometimes is you might get, typecast, pigeonholed, whatever it is that we want to put in there. But, but people expect certain things, and that's what they want you to do. Chick lit is one of the things, because it's beach season, right? So, if an author has always been writing the things that, the book you take to the beach, boy girl meet, I mean, it's kind of like a Hallmark movie, right? Boy girl meet, some type of drama, boy girl get married. And now they've kind of thrown in, okay, boy girl, but that's all right. I mean, but if all of a sudden it was something like a war movie, now if you didn't have boy girl drama and boy girl, people are going to go, what the heck? So you can kind of change the formula, but not the overall concept.
Yeah, human beings can't understand or see things that are drastically new. There's
Right.
the old belief that the Mayans couldn't see the conquistadors'
Mm-hmm.
ships when they were in harbor
Right.
because they'd never seen anything
They'd
so
never
big,
seen a
and
ship, so they didn't know
so they couldn't.
danger. Mm-hmm.
But it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't even danger. They couldn't
Mm-hmm.
see it. Their
Right.
minds couldn't comprehend it. It was
Right.
not visible to
Mm-hmm.
them, even though they were there.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until the smaller ships started coming, the
Mm-hmm.
rowboats, that they were able to see them. So human beings, we grow iteratively.
Mm-hmm.
We grow at a very slow
Mm-hmm.
pace. Evolution
Mm-hmm.
is a very slow
Mm-hmm.
process, and so um, yeah, we
Mm-hmm.
need to recognize
Mm-hmm.
that. And the reason why something is working is because
Mm-hmm.
it's been working in the
Mm-hmm.
past, and you can iterate, but
Mm-hmm.
creating something brand new
Mm-hmm.
has a lower probability of
Mm-hmm.
success.
Right. And it's funny because I always feel sorry for the big authors, and I don't care if it's fiction or nonfiction, when they've written 5, 10, 100 books that are all very similar. And yeah, and I always wonder, what if they did something different? Well, they can. That's where you have pen names, right? And all of
Right.
these various things. But yeah, it's got to be a challenge to do that. But it comes back to, who are you writing for?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
yeah, and then you start adding in all the other stuff. Okay, you might be writing for Bob Smith, the persona of Bob Smith, but is Bob Smith going to buy what you're writing? Or and that comes back to those goals, right? I did promotion one time, or was approached to do promotion one time, I should say, by an author, and this was long enough ago that Oprah was still on, right? And Oprah had the book of the month, and this person came to me, and she was a brand new author, you know she'd never really done anything, and she had a great idea for a book. In fact, she had published it, and this was long enough ago that she had 30,000 copies in her garage because you didn't have print on demand. And she came to me and she said, I want you to get me as Oprah's book of the month. And I said, okay, that's a BHAG. That's and it's not doable, right? Because 12 times a year that happened. But I told her, I said, there's all this that has to happen in between. Let's pitch you to the local media. Let's do this. No, I want to be on Oprah.
Yeah,
And
and
yeah,
what's interesting about that, she thinks she wants to be on Oprah because she
right.
thinks it's
Cool.
catching lightning in a bottle.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
But the thing is, so I'll give it just for your audience.
mm-hmm,
I had a client who would go on every year on
mm-hmm,
Oprah, and he started by doing one segment of an episode, and then the next year he did a whole
mm-hmm,
episode, and then he did an entire week for like
mm-hmm.
5 years after that.
Wow.
Right. And you would think that book by that person would
Mm-hmm,
sell really well, right?
mm-hmm.
How many books if someone was on Oprah for a week, how many books do you think they would sell?
Well, you'd think. I mean, the assumption would be that they would sell a lot.
Right. Okay. So now I'm going to tell you that the book that he wrote
Mm-hmm,
and the reason he was on the
mm-hmm.
show, his name is Pierce Howard. He wrote a 1,000-page book titled "The Owner's Manual for the Brain."
Ew.
But I mean, perfectly relevant to
Mhm,
talk about
mhm,
lots of
right.
psychology
Mhm, mhm,
and neurological things and
mhm,
all sorts of things that Oprah would talk
mhm,
about on
right.
the shows.
Mhm,
Great guests,
mhm.
great content,
Oh, great
but
conversations, right? Mhm.
right, but for the stay-at-home mom,
She's
who is
not
the
buying
majority of,
that.
she's not going to buy that
Right,
book,
right.
right? So we I think the biggest year we sold like 2,500
Mhm,
copies for him being
right.
on for the
Mhm,
week.
mhm,
But you hear about a book selling 100,000 because they're on
mhm,
Oprah. Well, that's
mhm,
the audience matters. The
mhm,
message to the audience
mhm,
matters. Having that book not aligned with an audience
mhm,
meant that it wasn't
mhm,
going to sell, no matter
mhm,
the size of the audience, no matter
right.
the fact that
Mhm,
Oprah would talk with
mhm,
the author about it all day long
mhm,
for 5 days.
mhm, mhm, right. Well, and I told the person that was talking to me, I said, okay, I wave the magic wand and I get you on Oprah. Can you or somebody fulfill the 30, 50,
Right.
100,000 order immediately? And
Right.
and I said, because the worst thing is when, oh, it's back ordered, because then I don't order it, right? Back to I've got the attention span of a gnat. And of course she couldn't do that. And I said, let's build. So, well, she didn't hire me because I would not guarantee. I mean, and that was the word that she wanted. I would not guarantee Oprah. And I'm like, no, no. And but it's, again, it's your audience. If you've done something where, maybe it's a book that, like you were saying, a book that appeals to very, very high level thinkers. 2,500 might have been a huge goal for them to make. And so that's, it comes back to that. Who are you selling? What are your goals? And you have to know that before you start.
Yep. And know your audience.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. I remember I had an author on one time, and he had what sounded like a really good, very interesting book. It was $150 a copy. Now, I mean, obviously, it was more of an educational type of book, but no, I mean, and he wouldn't send me even a draft copy to review, but and he did went almost nowhere with it because his audience might have thought, hey, this is the greatest thing in the world, but they weren't going to spend $150 for it. And in this day and age, we want the Audible version, right? Or I'm old enough to remember Cliff Notes. And so yeah, I mean, it's knowing who it is that you're writing for. And I love that you help authors through that, because we all have blinders, right? We
Right.
think what we've got is the latest, greatest, best thing in the world. Everybody should want it. And maybe
Yeah.
not.
Almost always not.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we do with our clients is we try to not only do the buyer personas, but we try to
Mm-hmm.
define the size of the potential
Right.
market
Mm-hmm.
for what we're doing.
Right.
So we look at it in terms of bodies of water. And with
Ah.
bodies of water, you've got depth
Mm-hmm.
and you've got size,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so if you've got a subject matter for a book or anything
Mm-hmm.
really that has um, shallow felt need
Mm-hmm.
and not a large audience,
Right.
you got a puddle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how to
Mm-hmm.
um, how to pluck your nose hairs. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's a puddle. If you've got a topic that appeals to a wide number
Mm-hmm.
of people
Mm-hmm.
with shallow felt need,
Mm-hmm.
you've got a bayou or a swamp,
Right. Mm-hmm.
right? And a book like that would be like How Men Can Shave Better. Like
Right.
most men
Yeah.
shave, and
A
that's a
lot of
big, huge
people might
audience.
read it, but
Well,
mm-hmm.
there probably a lot of people probably wouldn't read it because do I really want to spend any amount of time on
Mm-hmm.
shaving? Because I can go
Right. I
shave
know how to
myself? No,
shave. Mm-hmm.
there's just not a huge felt
Mm-hmm.
need
Mm-hmm.
for most people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the next is what we call a well. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a small audience but
Right. But deep. Mm-hmm.
deep
Mm-hmm.
felt need. So most of my clients actually fall into this category.
Mm-hmm.
So as an example, I've worked on several sales books
Mm-hmm.
in my career. There are about 7 million salespeople in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
right? So 7 million is not a small number,
Right.
but it's a very small fraction
Mm-hmm.
of it's like 2% of the
Mm-hmm.
population, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a
Right.
huge giant percentage
Mm-hmm.
of the population. So but for a salesperson, their need to improve their salesmanship, their
Mm-hmm.
ability to
Mm-hmm.
close sales is something that they have a deep felt
Mm-hmm.
need
Mm-hmm.
about. And so you have deep felt need, but not a wide audience.
Mm-hmm.
And most nonfiction business
Mm-hmm.
books and personal development
Mm-hmm.
books fit into that
Mm-hmm.
category
Right. Yeah.
because deep felt need,
Mm-hmm.
when you have the need,
Mm-hmm.
but not everybody has
Mm-hmm.
that need.
Right.
The final body of water is deep felt need,
Mm-hmm.
big
The
wide
ocean.
audience, or the
Mm-hmm.
ocean, right?
Mm-hmm.
We call that the ocean. And there's only a few categories of books that fit there.
Mm-hmm.
So like diet and health would fit
Mm-hmm.
into that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why you see diet books, the new
Mm-hmm.
diet books every season coming out because
Mm-hmm.
it's trendy and fatty.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Books on personal finance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it could be personal investment, could be
Mm-hmm.
how to do your taxes,
Mm-hmm.
but personal finance because
Right.
anybody in the first world,
Mm-hmm.
you're dealing with personal finance stuff. So that would
Mm-hmm.
be another, and then books that fall into um, like purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So like the purpose-driven life,
Right. Right.
or that
Mm-hmm.
kind of a book.
Mm-hmm.
They generally tend to do
Mm-hmm.
very well at that level. So
Mm-hmm.
really, if you've got a well book, why would you should never have an expectation that's going to sell
Right.
at an
Right.
ocean level. It's not.
Yeah.
That's
Mm-hmm.
not possible.
Yeah. You might sell one or two, but certainly not enough that's going to make a difference. I mean, the goal would be make your well a little bit bigger, but not an awful
Well,
lot.
you normally don't determine the
Right.
well,
The well
right?
is the
Because
well.
like
Mm-hmm.
there's 7 million salespeople. How are
Mm-hmm.
you going to make that audience any
Right.
bigger?
Yeah. You're not
You're
going
not.
to say now
You're
there's
not going to
nine
make more.
million.
Right, exactly. So then you're dealing with like, cool. Well,
Mm-hmm.
what would be a realistic
Mm-hmm.
opportunity for me to to really own that
Mhm.
market? Is it 0.5%,
Mhm.
1%, 3%? We know that
Mhm.
that in most industries, if you get
Mhm.
up to around 7%,
Mhm.
you're the biggest name in
Right.
that field, right?
Right.
So,
Mhm.
right, it's really just kind of
Mhm.
determining what is based
Mhm.
on also what you're bringing to the table,
Mhm.
what you can realistically do
Mhm.
within that.
Mhm.
And I think we find that that tends to help
Mhm.
crystallize the
Mhm.
focus of defining
Mhm.
outcome and measurement,
Mhm.
and designing the
Mhm.
campaign for the audience.
Right. Right. Well, oh my gosh, Michael, this has been so much fun. We didn't even talk about your book, and it is absolutely fascinating. And so we need to have you back so that we can talk about that. And I'll want to know, puddle, wave, ocean, well. But if someone is saying, okay, I have a book in me, or I've been told I should write a book, but they really are serious about it, but they need guidance. How do they find you, and what are the services that you provide?
So, good question. For someone who's interested in writing a book,
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest they go to bookretreat.com, bookretreat.com.
Mm-hmm.
We have a model and a process. We go down to Guatemala once or twice a year for a month
Mm-hmm.
each. And I have a model where we extract, from a planning standpoint, from the
Mm-hmm.
left hemisphere of the brain, a very detailed outline. Takes
Mm-hmm.
about a week of the month. And then
Mm-hmm.
we spend the remaining 3 weeks
Mm-hmm.
taking that exceptionally detailed outline and
Mm-hmm.
fleshing it out into a
Mm-hmm.
written book. So we have that. We do do that in studio with clients. It's a little
Okay.
bit more expensive to do that. We do
Mm-hmm.
that. We certainly do ghostwriting.
Mm-hmm.
But bookretreat.com would be the place that I would
Mm-hmm.
send folks. If somebody's interested in, if they're at the level where they have a big enough audience and platform, and they've got a big enough budget
Mm-hmm.
to run a New York Times bestseller,
Mm-hmm.
then I'd have or USA Today or
Mm-hmm.
Success.
Right.
I would have them go to promotabook.com.
Mm-hmm.
Those would be the two main areas.
Mm-hmm.
And my email is really simple. It's Michael at Promote a Book. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy
Mm-hmm.
to answer questions as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Right. And we've got your LinkedIn link in our show notes, as well as the link to the website. This really is so fascinating, because how many times have we told you should write a book? You should write a book. I've given up. I just tell people when they tell me you should write a book, because I think, yeah, but we're all told that, because especially if we are successful, motivational. I mean, several of those big categories. It's, you should write a book. But there are people who should write a book, and they're at the lost stage. So I hope that they will contact you, because, you don't need to do this alone.
Yep, for sure. You are not alone, and there are people who
Mm-hmm.
have made it their life's mission and life's goal to
Mm-hmm.
help support
Mm-hmm.
you. So,
Right, right. I love it. I love it. Well, Michael, like I said, we are at the top of the hour. We'll have you back on so that we can talk about your book. But until then, or just for anybody, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
and I'll probably always leave this as a final thought, because it's something that has stuck with me for my majority of my professional career. I was walking the streets of New York City with Roy H. Williams, the Wizard of Ads, after Book Expo, which used to be the biggest trade event in the world for publishing. And Roy turned to me and he said, "Hey, Michael, the winners and losers in life are determined when the teams are picked. There are two teams that are essential for your success. The first are the team of people you select, that select you to be on their team. And the second are those you select to be on your team." And what I would urge your audience to do is make sure that they're selecting the right people to be on their team.
I love it. I love it. Well, I'm Deb Creer. I've been having such a fascinating discussion with Michael Ardrew. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.